The Haunting Truth, a New York cold case. Finally solved for decades, the brutal murder of Margaret Holloway remained one of New York's most haunting mysteries. In 1987, the 32-year-old woman was found bludgeoned to death in her small Brooklyn apartment, her case growing colder with each passing year. Leads dried up, suspects vanished, and despite the relentless work of detectives, justice seemed out of reach. Margaret was known for her kindness and unwavering dedication to her community. A schoolteacher with a passion for helping underprivileged children, she was beloved by those who knew her. But on a cold October night, her life was violently taken from her, leaving her family and friends devastated. Detectives at the time combed through the crime scene, collecting evidence that included a bloody fingerprint on the doorknob. However, forensic technology in the late 1980s was limited, and while the print was preserved, it led nowhere. With no solid witnesses and no suspects, the case went unsolved. The years turned into decades, and for Margaret's loved ones, hope faded. But in 2025, everything changed. Advancements in forensic technology gave cold case detectives a renewed chance to analyze old evidence. The breakthrough came when an intern at the forensic lab, reviewing unsolved cases, flagged Margaret's case for re-examination. Using cutting-edge biometric scanning, experts magnified the once inconclusive fingerprint, revealing ridge details that had been impossible to analyze decades earlier. The system flagged a potential match, but detectives needed more. They painstakingly reconstructed Lawson's past, retracing his steps on the night of the murder. A breakthrough came when an old friend of Lawson's, now in poor health and looking to clear his conscience, came forward. He recalled a frantic phone call from Lawson that night, filled with cryptic apologies and references to a mistake he couldn't undo. Investigators used this testimony to obtain a warrant for Lawson's DNA. When compared to genetic evidence found at the scene, the results were undeniable, a perfect match. With this airtight proof, detectives moved in for the long-awaited arrest. The once inconclusive fingerprint was re-examined using modern biometric techniques, and this time, it yielded a match. The print belonged to Richard Lawson, a now 63-year-old man with a criminal record stretching back to the 1980s. Lawson had been arrested multiple times for burglary and assault, but he had never been linked to Margaret's case. At the time of the murder, he lived just a few blocks away from her apartment. Investigators revisited his history and found inconsistencies in his whereabouts on the night of the crime. With the newly obtained forensic evidence, they finally had what they needed to confront him. When detectives arrived at Lawson's modest home in upstate New York, they came prepared. They parked their vehicles a few blocks away, approaching, on foot to avoid tipping him off. The moment they knocked on his door, the weight of nearly 4 decades of secrecy became evident. Lawson hesitated before answering, and as soon as he saw their badges, his face drained of color. At first, he feigned ignorance, asking why they had come. But when detectives laid out the forensic evidence, the enhanced fingerprint, the corroborating DNA, and the testimony, his hands started shaking. Trying to compose himself, he denied everything, but his voice wavered. When they mentioned the long-forgotten phone call to his friend, something in him snapped. He collapsed into a chair, buried his face in his hands, and muttered, "It was never supposed to happen like that." As they presented the evidence, he remained silent, refusing to answer questions. However, his demeanor shifted when they detailed the forensic breakthrough. Cornered by science, Lawson finally broke down, admitting to the crime but attempting to justify it as a robbery gone wrong. Margaret's family, who had waited almost 40 years for answers, was overcome with emotion. Her younger sister, Helen, recalled the pain of growing up without closure. "We always knew someone out there had done this to her. But as the years passed, we feared we'd never know who. Now we do." Lawson was formally charged with murder and stands trial in what many are calling a landmark moment for forensic science. Prosecutors believe that with his confession and the fingerprint evidence, justice will finally be served for Margaret Holloway. As her case makes headlines, it serves as a reminder that no matter how much time passes, justice can still prevail. Cold case detectives across the country are now re-examining unsolved crimes, hoping that advancements in forensic science can bring more long-awaited answers. For Margaret's family, this long chapter of uncertainty has finally come to an end. Though nothing can bring her back, the knowledge that her killer has been identified and will face the consequences brings them some peace at last.